Mia thought she could have it all. A loving husband at home and secret nights with her new fling. But when she returned from one of her affairs, she found the house stripped bare and a single note that would unravel her world. This is the story of how one man turned heartbreak into the ultimate act of quiet revenge. Mia and Aaron Whitaker were the kind of couple people like to envy. They'd met in college in Portland and built a life in Seattle that looked perfect from the outside. At 33, Aaron had made a name for himself as a talented architect. He was the steady, thoughtful one. The kind of husband who brought coffee to Mia's office on busy days and left her notes reminding her he believed in her. Mia, 31, thrived at a marketing agency where she'd just been promoted to lead strategist. Her friends joked that she was unstoppable. For years, it really did feel like nothing could shake them. They still spent lazy Sundays exploring the waterfront, still texted each other goodnight when work trips separated them. Even after 5 years of marriage, Aaron looked at Mia with the same warmth he'd had the day they exchanged vows in a small garden behind her parents' house. But it's funny how small shifts can change everything. At first, Aaron hardly noticed. Mia had always been ambitious, so her promotion meant longer hours, more client dinners, sudden trips to California. She was tired all the time, she said. Her voice was softer on the phone. When she did come home, she seemed distracted, scrolling through messages she never shared. Aaron tried not to take it personally. He kept telling himself she was just adjusting to her new role. Still, there were moments that unsettled him. Like the evening she came home late, her hair damp from the rain, and brushed past his attempt to hug her. Or the Saturday morning she slipped out before dawn, claiming she had to meet a client who was flying in from Chicago. She didn't even kiss him goodbye. Aaron wanted to trust her. He reminded himself she'd never given him a real reason not to. Yet there was a tightening in his chest he couldn't ignore, a suspicion he hated himself for having. One Friday evening, Mia told him she was going to meet her college friends for dinner. "You should have a night to relax," she insisted, smiling as she gathered her purse. She promised she wouldn't be too late. Aaron ordered takeout and tried to focus on a movie, but his mind kept wandering. Hours passed. By midnight, she'd stopped replying to his messages. He texted again, feeling ridiculous and overbearing, but no answer came. Around 2 a.m., he finally heard her key in the door. She walked in slowly, pausing when she saw him waiting. Her voice was careful, almost rehearsed, as she explained that one of her friends had gone through a breakup and needed company. Aaron listened, trying to believe her, but something in the way she avoided his eyes made the words ring hollow. The next day, he pushed aside the memory and did what he always did. He made breakfast, cleaned up, and tried to pretend they were okay. He told himself he wouldn't become the paranoid husband who read too much into everything. But doubt crept into his thoughts anyway, especially when he saw how often Mia smiled at her phone, how quickly she locked the screen when he walked by. A week later, the feeling he'd tried to bury finally took shape. He was folding laundry in the bedroom when Mia's phone, left on the nightstand, lit up with a text. He wasn't the sort to snoop, but his eyes landed on the preview before he could look away. "Last night was unforgettable. When can I see you again?" The world seemed to narrow into a dull roar. He held the folded towel in both hands, willing himself to breathe. Mia walked in, saw the phone in his hand, and froze. For a second, her expression was unguarded, shock, then guilt. But she quickly slipped into her usual calm tone. "That's just a client. He jokes around," she said, reaching for the phone. She didn't look him in the eye. Aaron nodded like he believed her, because he wasn't ready to confront the truth. He felt the ground under their life cracking, but he still hoped it was a misunderstanding. He spent the rest of the weekend watching her with new awareness, every affectionate gesture shadowed by the memory of that message. And yet, he said nothing. He went to work Monday as if nothing had happened, greeted her in the evenings, held her hand when they watched TV. But inside, something was quietly unraveling. The certainty he'd once had about Mia, about them, was gone. He couldn't help replaying the little inconsistencies in her stories. The nights she slipped in late, the phone she never let out of her sight. In the past, he'd trusted her completely. Now, he found himself scanning every detail for signs he'd missed. He hated it. He hated the suspicion, the hollow ache when she kissed his cheek without meeting his gaze. But what he hated most was the fear that all along, he'd been loving someone who no longer loved him back. He wasn't ready to act on that fear yet, but the seeds were planted, and Aaron knew they wouldn't stop growing. In the quiet hours before dawn, when Mia was asleep beside him, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd already lost her. Aaron tried to pretend things hadn't changed. On the surface, he and Mia still went through the motions of a normal marriage. They shared meals, talked about work, planned a weekend visit to her sister in Tacoma. But everything felt different now, like there was a script Mia was reciting instead of real conversations. He noticed how carefully she phrased her stories, how she never mentioned names when she talked about her late nights. He wanted to believe her. Some days he almost managed it. She still laughed at his jokes sometimes, still curled up next to him on the couch. But at night, when she turned her back to sleep, Aaron would stare into the dark, trying to find an explanation for the gut-deep certainty that she was lying. 2 weeks after he'd seen the text message, Mia said she'd be working late again. She had a big presentation on Monday, she explained, and needed time to finalize the slides. Aaron nodded, wishing he could pretend it sounded convincing. Around 6 p.m., he watched her pull out of the driveway. He stood at the window long after her taillights vanished. He told himself to let it go, to stop imagining the worst. But as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind his back. He tried to distract himself. He washed dishes, answered emails, made a half-hearted attempt to watch a game on TV. But when he checked the time again, it was almost 9 p.m., and she still hadn't called. He picked up his phone, scrolled through their recent messages, and felt a cold wave of resentment. She hadn't texted once since she left. Before he could overthink it, Aaron grabbed his keys. He told himself he wouldn't do anything rash. He just needed to see where she really was. Maybe she was exactly where she claimed to be, and this would prove he was losing his mind. He drove slowly through the familiar streets, heading downtown. He knew where Mia's office was, a sleek glass building that stayed lit late into the night. But when he parked across the street, her car wasn't there. He waited 10 minutes, hoping she might arrive, but the lot stayed empty. His hands tightened on the wheel. He tried to imagine innocent explanations. She stopped for dinner, she was at a client's office, but none of them felt honest. He opened their shared location app on his phone, something they'd set up years earlier for safety during business trips. It was still active. The little blue dot showing Mia's phone glowed in a neighborhood across town. Aaron didn't remember driving there. Later, he tried to reconstruct the route, but all he'd recall was the hammering of his heart as he turned onto a quiet street lined with bars and late-night cafes. He parked at the end of the block and cut the engine. Mia's car was in front of a low building with a neon sign pulsing above the entrance. He sat there, staring, trying to convince himself it didn't mean what he thought. He waited, watching the door. Minutes felt like hours. Then he saw her. Mia stepped outside, laughing, her hand brushing against a man's arm. Aaron didn't recognize him. Tall, dark-haired, confident in the way he leaned close to her. She didn't pull away. She looked up at him with the kind of smile Aaron hadn't seen in months. The man rested his hand on the small of her back as they talked. Mia reached for his wrist and squeezed it lightly. It wasn't a gesture you'd give a friend. It was intimate in a way that made Aaron feel nauseous. He ducked lower in his seat, afraid they'd see him. Part of him wanted to storm out of the car, demand an explanation, make a scene right there on the sidewalk. But he stayed frozen, watching them disappear back inside together. When the door swung shut behind them, Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands shook on the steering wheel. He felt humiliated, furious, and completely alone. He sat there for a long time, until the ache in his chest turned into something steadier. Resolve. He knew there was no going back to how things were. Even if Mia confessed, even if she swore she regretted it, he couldn't erase the image of her with that man. But instead of confronting her, he made a different choice. He drove home slowly, every mile giving him time to think. By the time he stepped inside their quiet house, he already knew what he needed to do. Aaron didn't want a screaming fight. He didn't want to throw accusations back and forth or listen to excuses. If she could lie so easily, he doubted anything she said would matter. What he wanted was to take control of what happened next. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, replaying every sign he'd ignored. The late nights, the secretive texts, the sudden distance between them. It was all so obvious in hindsight. He wondered if her friends knew, if they'd covered for her. He wondered how long she'd been planning to leave him, or if she ever planned to at all. Hours later, when Mia came home, he pretended to be asleep. He kept his breathing slow, even as she tiptoed around the bedroom. She didn't say anything, didn't touch him, and that silence told him everything he needed to hear. Aaron knew he couldn't keep living like this. He wasn't going to beg for honesty she wouldn't give. He wasn't going to wait for her to admit the truth. If she decided to betray him, he'd decide how their story ended. He lay awake the rest of the night, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, the uncertainty was gone. The only question left was how, exactly, he would leave her behind. The next morning, Mia acted as if nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, scrolled through her phone, and asked if Aaron wanted her to pick up groceries later. He watched her carefully, searching for any sign that she'd guess he knew. But she was so practiced that he almost believed she was telling the truth. Almost. Aaron answered her questions with quiet nods and one-word replies. He knew she noticed the change in his tone, but she didn't press him. Maybe she was relieved he didn't start a fight. Maybe she assumed he'd keep pretending forever. After she left for work, Aaron sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He thought about confronting her directly. He imagined the conversation, the way she'd deny, deflect, maybe even cry. The idea exhausted him. He didn't want a confession. He wanted a clean break. That afternoon, he called his boss and asked about working remotely. The company had offices in Denver, and he knew there was a project coming up that would need extra support. His manager was surprised but agreed. Aaron had always been steady, dependable. No one questioned his decision. When he hung up, he felt the first trace of relief he'd had in weeks. He had a plan now. It wouldn't erase the hurt, but it would give him a way out. The next step was the money. He opened their joint accounts and started moving funds into an account Mia couldn't access. He left enough so the withdrawals wouldn't set off immediate alarms. Just enough to keep her unaware. He transferred the rest into a separate savings account he'd created under his name alone. Every evening that week, he packed a few things. Clothes, important documents, photos he couldn't stand to leave behind. He slipped them into boxes and stored them in his car trunk. He worked methodically, never taking too much at once, never leaving the closets obviously empty. Mia didn't notice. She was too busy pretending they were fine. He also prepared his own place to land. He booked a short-term rental in Denver and arranged for the movers to pick up his boxes the day he left. Each task made him feel steadier. This was his decision now, not something happening to him. The last thing he did was write the note. He didn't want a dramatic letter full of accusations. He wanted her to understand that he'd seen everything, and that he was finished. He used the back of an old grocery list, wrote the words simply, "I know everything." No signature, no plea for an explanation. He folded it once and set it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it first. The night before he left, Mia came home later than usual. She smelled faintly of cologne again, the same one he'd noticed before. She walked past him without a word. Aaron sat in the living room, listening to her move around the house. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to anymore. When he finally stood to leave, he felt strangely calm. He walked through the house slowly, making sure he'd packed everything that mattered. He took one last look at the walls where their wedding photos used to hang. He didn't feel regret, just relief that it was over. He left the note on the counter, turned off the lights, and closed the front door behind him. Aaron didn't drive to Denver that night. Instead, he checked into a hotel a few miles away. He wanted to be close enough to imagine exactly what Mia would see when she came home. He pictured her stepping inside, expecting him to be there, maybe rehearsing another excuse. He wondered how long it would take before she noticed the missing things, the silence, the note. In his hotel room, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel like he'd won anything. But he felt free in a way he hadn't since the first moment he doubted her. At dawn, Mia would find the empty house and the simple truth he'd left behind. And there would be nothing she could say to fix it. Aaron knew some people would think he should have confronted her face to face, demanded answers, fought for closure. But he didn't see the point. He didn't need her to explain why she'd betrayed him. He already understood. She'd made her choice. Now he was making his. He sipped his drink and watched the sky lighten over the city. In a few hours, Mia would come home to a house stripped of every piece of their life together. She'd call his phone over and over, and he wouldn't answer. She'd realize that he hadn't just walked out. He'd erased himself from the life they'd shared. And in that moment, Aaron believed she would finally understand the cost of her secrets. Mia came home just after sunrise. She was tired from a night she thought had given her everything she wanted. Excitement, escape, a sense of being needed by someone new. She unlocked the front door with the same casual routine she'd done 100 times, expecting Aaron to be asleep or out for a run. But as soon as she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The house was too still. She set her purse down and called his name, her voice echoing back at her. No answer. She walked through the hallway, expecting him to step out of the bedroom or the kitchen. Nothing. When she reached the kitchen counter, she saw the note. 3 words in Aaron's handwriting, written so simply it almost didn't register at first. I know everything. Mia stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hand. She looked around the kitchen, suddenly seeing details she'd never noticed. The coffee machine was missing. The photos that used to hang by the pantry were gone. Her chest tightened as she moved through the house. She opened the hall closet, half empty. She ran to the bedroom. Aaron's drawers were pulled open, most of his clothes missing. The hamper was gone. Even his spare laptop wasn't there. Panic spread through her as she checked the bathroom cabinet, the guest room, the garage. Everywhere she looked, something of his was gone. She grabbed her phone and called him. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Same result. Her hands were shaking now. She tried texting, tried every way she could think of to reach him. Nothing worked. After the 3rd call, she finally sat down. For the first time, she realized he wasn't coming back. He hadn't left in anger. He'd left on purpose, calmly, with enough planning that she hadn't even seen it happening. That terrified her more than any screaming fight ever could. Mia spent hours calling everyone she thought might know where he was. She tried his parents, pretending she was worried about him. She tried his best friend, who told her Aaron had decided to take some time away. No one gave her any details. No one sounded surprised. By the end of the day, she was exhausted and furious. She told herself this was overreaction, that he would cool off and come home. But when she logged into their bank accounts, she felt her stomach drop. Almost every account was empty. Enough left to cover the mortgage and utilities for a couple of months, but not much more. She refreshed the browser over and over, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. The realization hit her all at once. Aaron hadn't just walked out. He had prepared for this carefully. He'd made sure she wouldn't have access to his money, his things, or even the satisfaction of an explanation. That night, she sat alone at the kitchen table, the note in front of her. She read it again and again, as if the meaning would change if she studied it hard enough. But it didn't. I know everything. 3 words. But they were enough to dismantle everything she'd convinced herself she could hide. In the days that followed, she tried to find him. She drove by his office, only to be told he was on a remote assignment. She called old college friends, hoping someone would slip up and tell her where he'd gone. But no one did. Each unanswered message chipped away at her certainty that she could fix this. She began to realize that the story she told herself, that she could have both the thrill of the affair and the safety of her marriage, was over. And the man she thought would replace Aaron? He quickly lost interest when the secrecy faded. Their fling couldn't survive the reality of her empty house and unraveling life. Within a week, he stopped calling. Mia sat in the quiet house, surrounded by reminders of what she'd destroyed. She thought about all the excuses she'd made. That she was just lonely, that Aaron was too focused on work, that she deserved more excitement. None of it sounded convincing anymore. She had wanted freedom. Now she had it. But it didn't look anything like she'd imagined. Some nights, she still called his number, hoping he might pick up. She left voicemails she knew he'd never answer, each one sounding a little more desperate. "Please, can we talk? I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Just tell me where you are." But Aaron never called back. As weeks turned into months, Mia stopped trying to reach him. The house felt colder, emptier. She realized she had built her entire identity around the security of knowing he was always there. She had assumed he'd forgive anything. She'd been wrong. She went back to work and tried to pretend she was fine. But she saw the way her coworkers glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking. She heard the edge in her sister's voice when they talked on the phone. She knew everyone could see what she had lost. And she had no one to blame but herself. Late at night, she sometimes caught herself reaching for her phone out of habit, about to send Aaron a message. But she always stopped. There was nothing left to say. While Mia tried to patch together the pieces of her life, Aaron was already gone. He left Seattle behind without looking back. He drove east until the mountains gave way to wide plains. By the time he reached Denver, he felt lighter than he had in years. He rented a furnished apartment and unpacked the few boxes he'd brought. For the first time in a long while, nothing reminded him of her. Aaron kept his move quiet. He told only the people he trusted most. A few friends, his parents, his manager. No one questioned his choice to start over. If anything, they seemed relieved he was finally free of the lies that had worn him down. During the first weeks, he kept expecting regret to set in. He braced for the moment he'd feel like he'd overreacted or walked away too quickly. But the regret never came. What he felt instead was relief. He filled his days with work and long walks around the city. He joined a local running group, not because he needed new friends right away, but because it felt good to be around people who knew nothing about his past. He didn't have to explain himself. He didn't have to pretend everything was fine. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about Mia. He pictured her in the empty house, finding the note. He wondered if she ever admitted to herself what she'd done, or if she still tried to justify it. But those thoughts didn't keep him awake anymore. They passed like background noise. One morning, a month after he moved, he finally changed his phone number. He deleted old voicemails he hadn't listened to. He knew Mia had tried to reach him. He also knew nothing she could say would change what had happened. After that, he stopped checking social media for updates about her. He didn't care anymore who she was seeing or what she posted to convince everyone she was fine. That wasn't his concern. As weeks turned into months, Aaron began to build a routine he actually enjoyed. He started volunteering on weekends at a community design center, helping nonprofits with renovations. He found satisfaction in using his skills for something that had nothing to do with his old life. He also started seeing a therapist, something he'd never imagined himself doing before. At first, he just needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge him. But slowly, those sessions helped him see how much of himself he'd given up in that marriage. How long he'd ignored his own instincts to keep the peace. He didn't blame himself for Mia's choices, but he did recognize the ways he'd avoided hard truths. And he promised himself he wouldn't make the same mistake again. One evening in early spring, Aaron sat on his small balcony overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting behind the buildings, turning the windows gold. He thought about everything that had happened, the suspicion, the betrayal, the quiet exit. He didn't feel bitterness anymore. He didn't even feel angry. What he felt was something simpler. Gratitude that he'd walked away instead of waiting for her to decide when it was over. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Mia's life never fully returned to normal. She tried to date again, but she never stayed with anyone for long. No one measured up to the stability she'd had with Aaron. No one trusted her the way he once did. Her friends offered sympathy, but even they grew tired of her explanations. Her family supported her, but she could tell they were disappointed. She'd had something rare, and she'd thrown it away. Some nights, when she couldn't sleep, She still scrolled through old photos, vacations, birthdays, the ordinary moments that once felt unshakable. She tried to remember exactly when she decided to risk it all. She couldn't pinpoint a single moment. It was 1,000 small choices that built up until there was no way back. Mia finally accepted that Aaron wasn't coming home. She understood that no apology would erase what she'd done or undo the consequences. In the end, she was left with exactly what she'd chosen: a life without him. And Aaron? He moved forward. He knew he'd love again someday. But it would be different. He would never ignore his instincts again. He would never stay with someone who made him feel like he was an afterthought. He also knew he'd never have to prove his worth to anyone. He'd already done the hardest thing. He'd walked away from the person he thought he couldn't live without. In time, the story of Mia and the man she thought she needed became just that. A story. A closed chapter. A lesson he'd carry, but not a burden he'd keep carrying. Sometimes people asked Aaron if he missed her, if he wished he'd fought harder to save the marriage. He always answered honestly, no. He didn't hate her. He didn't wish her harm. He simply no longer wanted any part of the life she'd offered. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about punishing someone. It's about refusing to let their betrayal define you. It's about moving on, fully and without apology.